15 Golden Age stars who were actually bald but wore wigs.
He's the toupee king. We sit down with a man who perfected Sinatra's hairpiece as he dishes the dirt on which Hollywood hunks are covering up bald spots.
Behind every perfectly coiffed Hollywood leading man of the Golden Age lurked a secret that studios guarded as carefully as scandal. Many of cinema's most iconic stars were actually balding or completely bald, their legendary looks completed by expertly crafted hairpieces that audiences never suspected. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 15 beloved stars, whose famous hairstyles were cinematic illusions as carefully crafted as any special effect. From Humphrey Bogart's slicked-back elegance to John Wayne's rugged frontier mane, these actors' most consistent co-stars weren't their leading ladies, but the master wig makers who kept their secrets.
That's the hairpiece owned by Frank Sinatra.
These weren't just occasional hairpieces for specific roles. These were career-long deceptions that studios maintained with military-grade secrecy. Contracts included special clauses about hair care, dedicated stylists, traveled with stars, and publicity departments airbrushed photos and threatened lawsuits against anyone who dared mention the W word. The elaborate lengths Hollywood went to reveals just how important the perfect head of hair was to a leading man's marketability in the golden age of Hollywood.
Baldness, but a Manchester firm have developed the next best remedy.
The golden age of Hollywood was built on carefully constructed images. Stars weren't just actors, but icons meticulously shaped by studio systems. While the public was occasionally aware of cosmetic enhancements like nose jobs or dental work, one alteration remained strictly confidential: the hairpiece. For male stars especially, virility and attractiveness were intrinsically linked to a full head of hair, making baldness a career-threatening condition that required immediate concealment. Let's examine 15 legendary actors whose famous locks were Hollywood's best-kept secret, and how their artificial hair helped shape their unforgettable screen images. 1. Humphrey Bogart, the tough guy's secret vulnerability. Humphrey Bogart's slicked-back hair became as much a part of his iconic image as his trench coat in Casablanca. Yet by the time Bogart filmed noir classics like The Maltese Falcon and The Big Sleep, he was already significantly bald and completely dependent on hairpieces. Bogart began losing his hair in his early 30s when he was still playing supporting roles in villains. When his breakthrough as a leading man came with High Sierra and The Maltese Falcon in 1941, his hairline suddenly became a matter of serious studio concern. Cinematographer Arthur Edison later revealed that lighting Bogart became increasingly challenging as his hairpieces became more obvious. We developed specific key lighting techniques to minimize shadows that might reveal the hairline of his toupee, Edison noted. Bogey knew exactly which angles worked best and would sometimes quietly adjust his position if he felt the light might expose his hairpiece. According to Lauren Bacall's autobiography, Bogart never appeared without his hairpiece in public and was rarely seen without it even in private. Bogey had a standing rule that no photographers were allowed near the swimming pool, Bacall wrote. The one place he would remove his hairpiece was in the water, and he guarded that privacy fiercely. Perhaps the most revealing testament came during his final illness. As cancer took its toll in 1956 to 57, Bogart continued to wear his hairpiece during hospital stays and even insisted on having it properly positioned during his final days. For a man whose tough guy image defined mid-century masculinity, this private vulnerability remained his most closely guarded secret until the end. 2. Fred Astaire, dancing with an invisible partner. Fred Astaire's seemingly effortless elegance extended to his perfectly styled hair that never seemed to fall out of place, even during his most vigorous dance routines. What audiences didn't realize was that Astaire was performing with an invisible dance partner, a meticulously crafted hairpiece secured through technical innovations created specifically for his unique requirements. Astaire began losing his hair in his late 20s. By the time he arrived in Hollywood for his first RKO pictures, he was already wearing a custom-made hairpiece. The extraordinary technical challenge was keeping a hairpiece securely in place while performing dance routines that included jumps, spins, and even dancing on the ceiling. According to Astaire's longtime makeup artist, Robert Schiffer, we worked with Max Factor to develop a special adhesive that could withstand perspiration and rapid movement. Fred's hairpieces were constructed with a silk base rather than standard lace, which allowed better adhesion and ventilation during strenuous numbers. Astaire's perfectionism extended extended to his hairpieces, which he considered as much a part of his costume as his top hat and tails. He reportedly traveled with multiple identical hairpieces and insisted they be maintained by only a select few trusted stylists. What's particularly remarkable is that despite performing some of the most athletic dance routines in film history, there is not a single documented instance of his hairpiece ever coming loose or falling off during filming, a testament to both the innovation of Hollywood wig makers and Astaire's precise awareness of his movements. Astaire's dance partner Ginger Rogers once commented with characteristic wit, "I had to remember not to run my fingers through his hair during romantic scenes. Fred would have never forgiven me if I'd dislodged his little friend." 3. John Wayne, the Duke's hidden crown. John Wayne's rugged masculinity made him the definitive American Western star for decades. Yet one aspect of the Duke's iconic image was carefully crafted Hollywood illusion. His full head of hair, which had begun to disappear well before he reached the height of his fame. Wayne started losing his hair in his late 30s, around the time of his breakthrough with Stagecoach, 1939. As his stardom grew throughout the 1940s, his hairline receded correspondingly. By the early 1950s, Wayne was wearing hairpieces in nearly all his films, though the transition was implemented so gradually that audiences rarely noticed the change. What makes Wayne's case particularly interesting is how his hairpieces were specifically designed to reinforce his frontier persona. Unlike the sleek urban hairpieces created for stars like Cary Grant, Wayne's were intentionally crafted to appear slightly rough and windblown. Longtime collaborator Charlie Jamora recalled, "The Duke wanted his hairpieces to look natural for a man who spent his life outdoors. We deliberately avoided anything that looked too perfectly styled." The challenges of maintaining Wayne's rugged image while concealing his baldness became particularly acute during physically demanding Western shoots. Filming in dusty, windy environments like Monument Valley created unique problems for keeping hairpieces in place. Wayne's costume assistant, Luster Bayless, revealed, "For riding scenes, the Duke wore a specially designed bandana under his cowboy hat that helped keep everything in place during gallops and stunts." Wayne was reportedly more pragmatic about his hairpiece than many stars, viewing it as simply another element of his costume rather than a source of personal embarrassment. Director Howard Hawks once recalled that Wayne would remove his hairpiece in private settings with trusted friends, but would immediately put it back on if anyone outside his inner circle entered the room. As Wayne himself reportedly told a young actor, "This damn thing's hotter than a tin roof in August, but the ladies seem to like it, so on it stays." 4. Cary Grant. Perfect hair for the perfect man. If any Golden Age star embodied physical perfection, it was Cary Grant. His immaculate appearance, from his precisely tailored suits to his flawlessly styled hair, created a standard of male elegance that remains influential decades later. Yet the man once described by critic Pauline Kael as the man from Dream City maintained his dreamlike perfection with the help of expertly crafted hairpieces. Grant began experiencing hair loss in his mid-30s, around the time he was establishing himself as Hollywood's premier romantic leading man. For a star whose appeal was so connected to his physical perfection, this presented a potential career crisis. According to Grant's longtime makeup artist Del Armstrong, Grant's hairpieces were among the most expensive and meticulously crafted in Hollywood. Cary's hairpieces cost roughly 10 times what the average stars would, Armstrong revealed. They were constructed with each hair individually knotted into a base made of material so fine it was nearly invisible even in close-ups. Grant reportedly traveled with multiple hairpieces, each slightly different to account for how his character should appear in various situations. For romantic comedies like The Philadelphia Story, his hairpiece would be perfectly styled without a hair out of place. For more rugged roles like Gunga Din, a slightly messier variation would be used. What distinguished Grant's hairpieces was how they evolved as he aged. Unlike stars who maintained implausibly youthful hair into their senior years, Grant allowed his artificial hair to gray naturally, reflecting his actual age. This subtle authenticity helped maintain the illusion and prevented the jarring contrast that made some older stars' hairpieces more obvious. Grant was extremely private about his hairpieces, but occasionally revealed a sense of humor about his situation with close friends. Director Alfred Hitchcock once recalled, "Cary referred to his hairpiece as his realistic therapy for a traumatic condition. He insisted it wasn't vanity, but simply good business sense, as he put it. The public pays to see Cary Grant, not a bald man they don't recognize."
The moment I became a passionate hairdresser.
What's wrong with it?
Let me show you.
What are you reading, Dean?
popular mechanics. Yeah, get a load of that mechanic.
5. James Stewart, The Everyman's Secret. James Stewart's appeal was built on his relatability. His lanky frame, folksy manner, and seemingly natural appearance made him Hollywood's definitive everyman. This carefully crafted normality made the secret he kept for decades all the more surprising. Stewart relied on hairpieces for much of his career, though his were designed specifically to maintain his unpretentious screen persona. Unlike stars who began wearing hairpieces at the first sign of thinning, Stewart allowed his natural hair loss to progress visibly through his early films. In classics like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, 1939, and It's a Wonderful Life, 1946, Stewart appears with his authentic hairline, which was already noticeably receding. This transparency aligned with his down-to-earth image. However, as Stewart entered his 40s in the early 1950s, his hair loss accelerated to a point that began to affect his casting opportunities. Around the time of his collaborations with Alfred Hitchcock in films like Rear Window, 1954, Stewart began wearing hairpieces designed to look natural and slightly imperfect, in keeping with his unpolished image. According to Stewart's makeup artist Charles Schramm, Jimmy specifically requested that his hairpieces look like an ordinary man's hair. Slightly messy, not too perfect. He didn't want to look like he was wearing a hairpiece, but more importantly, he didn't want to look like he was trying too hard. Stewart was reportedly pragmatic about his hairpieces, viewing them as simply another element of his professional equipment rather than a source of personal vanity. Director Henry Koster once recalled, "Jimmy would put on his hairpiece with the same matter-of-fact attitude he'd use to put on his costume or have his makeup applied. There was no ego involved, it was just part of becoming the character." What's particularly notable is how Stewart's hairpieces evolved as he aged. Unlike some stars who maintained implausibly youthful hair into their senior years, Stewart allowed his artificial hair to thin and gray appropriately as he entered his 60s and 70s. Another example of the authenticity that defined his appeal. 6. Frank Sinatra, Old Blue Eyes and New Hair. Frank Sinatra's evolution from skinny Bobby Soxer idol to sophisticated chairman of the board included a physical transformation that went largely unnoticed by his adoring public. As his musical style matured and his acting roles grew more serious, Sinatra faced a common but potentially image-damaging problem: significant hair loss that began in his 30s and accelerated in his 40s. Sinatra began wearing hairpieces around 1954, roughly the same time he was rebuilding his career with his Oscar-winning performance in From Here to Eternity and recording his landmark Capitol albums. This timing was no coincidence. His professional resurgence required a refreshed image. What makes Sinatra's case fascinating is how his hairpieces became an open secret within his inner circle, occasionally serving as the basis for good-natured ribbing among the Rat Pack. During their famous performances at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, Dean Martin would sometimes make oblique references to Sinatra's Little Helper Up top, much to the audience's delight and Sinatra's mixed amusement and irritation. Sammy Davis Jr. later recalled that Sinatra had a complex relationship with his hairpiece. Frank was sensitive about it with strangers or the press, but with his friends, he'd sometimes use it as a prop. Once, after a particularly wild night, he sent his hairpiece in a box to Dean with a note saying, "Even I needed the day off to recover." Unlike some stars who maintained strict secrecy, Sinatra occasionally acknowledged his situation through humor. During a 1965 recording session, Sinatra reportedly removed his hairpiece during a break, placed it on a microphone stand, and quipped, "Even the damn thing needs a rest between takes." Sinatra's longtime valet, George Jacobs, revealed that Sinatra traveled with multiple hairpieces for different occasions: performance pieces styled for stage lighting, more natural-looking ones for film work, and casual pieces for everyday wear. Mr. S. had a specific routine for his hairpieces, Jacobs wrote. They were as much a part of his preparation as his cufflinks or bow tie. As Tony Bennett once observed, Frank could make anything seem cool, even something most men would be embarrassed about. That was his gift. He wore the hairpiece didn't wear him.
Frank Sinatra ashamed or embarrassed that he wore a toupee, or was he open with it?
You couldn't talk about it, and that goes for anyone who wears a hairpiece.
7. Burt Lancaster, the athletic star's covered secret. Burt Lancaster's powerful physical presence defined his screen image. The former circus acrobat brought an athletic dynamism to his roles that few actors could match. Yet this paragon of physical prowess hid a cosmetic secret. By his late 30s, Lancaster was already experiencing significant hair loss that required increasingly elaborate hairpieces. Lancaster's early films like The Killers, 1946, and Brute Force, 1947, feature his natural hairline, which was already noticeably receding. This changed, however, as he moved from film noir roles to more romantic and heroic parts in Technicolor productions. By the time Lancaster starred in swashbuckling adventures like The Crimson Pirate, 1952, he was wearing hairpieces that presented unique technical challenges given his physical performance style. These films required Lancaster to perform many of his own stunts, drawing on his acrobatic background for scenes involving swinging from ropes, leaping between sets, and elaborate sword fights. Stunt coordinator Lou Elias later revealed, Bert's hairpiece needed special reinforcement and attachment methods because of his stunts. We developed a system using spirit gum and fine mesh that could withstand somersaults and fight scenes without shifting. Lancaster apparently maintained a practical attitude about his hairpieces. Director John Frankenheimer once noted, Bert approached his hairpiece the way he approached everything, with professionalism and without vanity. If it needed adjustment between takes, he'd call for his hairdresser without any self-consciousness, the same way he'd call for a prop adjustment. Lancaster's longtime friend Kirk Douglas, who did not wear a hairpiece, once recalled with amusement, Bert and I had a running joke about his performance enhancer. I'd tease him that he had an unfair advantage with women because of his extra help up top. He'd fire back that I was just jealous because my natural hair didn't look as good as his purchased hair.
I want to thank all the members of the Academy who expressed this kind of confidence in voting for me. And right now I feel so happy that I want to thank all the members of the Academy who did not vote for me.
8. William Holden. From Golden Boy to Covered Crown. William Holden's transformation from the fresh-faced star of Golden Boy to the cynical, world-weary anti-hero of Sunset Boulevard and Stalag 17 paralleled a physical change that Hollywood carefully concealed, the premature hair loss that necessitated hairpieces for much of his adult career. Holden began losing his hair in his early 30s, around the time of his career resurgence with Sunset Boulevard, 1950. Ironically, in this film about Hollywood illusions, Holden still appears with his natural hairline, which is noticeably receding. By the time he starred in Stalag 17, 1953, for which he won an Academy Award, Holden had begun wearing hairpieces. Paramount Studios hairdresser Larry Germain later revealed, Bill's first hairpieces were designed to match his natural hairline from earlier films, just filling in what he'd lost. As time went on, we gradually gave him fuller coverage, but always maintained a slightly receded look at the temples that audiences associated with him. What distinguished Holden's situation was his apparent discomfort with his hairpieces, particularly in his personal life. According to several biographers, Holden often removed his hairpiece in private settings and seemed to resent the necessity of wearing it. Director Billy Wilder once recalled, Bill had no vanity about his appearance except for the hair situation. That bothered him because he felt it was inauthentic, which was ironic given that he was an actor playing different people for a living. This discomfort became particularly evident during the filming of The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957, in the humid jungles of Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. The challenging environment made maintaining his hairpiece especially difficult, and there are scenes where careful viewers can spot inconsistencies in his hair's appearance. By the 1960s, as Holden's alcoholism began affecting his appearance, his hairpieces became more obvious in films like The Wild Bunch, 1969, and The Towering Inferno, 1974. The contrast between publicity photos, which showed a full-haired Holden thanks to careful photography and retouching, and his on-screen appearance became more pronounced.
And tonight, I want to present you with your inscribed
9. Spencer Tracy, the natural actor's unnatural hair. Spencer Tracy's reputation as cinema's most natural actor, someone who seemingly wasn't acting at all but simply being, stands in ironic contrast to the artificial help he required to maintain his appearance on screen. Tracy's seemingly effortless authenticity extended to every aspect of his performance except one, the carefully crafted hairpieces he wore throughout much of his later career. Tracy began wearing hairpieces in the early 1950s, when he was in his early 50s and his hair had thinned considerably. What makes Tracy's case particularly interesting is how MGM approached his transition to hairpieces with unusual subtlety. Rather than suddenly giving him a full head of hair, Tracy's hairpieces were initially designed to look like the slightly thinning hair of a middle-aged man. Makeup artist William Tuttle later explained, with Spencer, we deliberately avoided the obvious hairpiece look. His early pieces were designed to match his natural hairline, just filling in the thinning areas. Over time, we gradually made them fuller controller, but never to the point where audiences would notice the change. This gradual approach matched Tracy's overall philosophy toward his craft, that acting should never call attention to itself. Tracy reportedly approached his hairpieces with the same pragmatic attitude he brought to every aspect of his profession, viewing them as simply another technical element of creating a character rather than a matter of personal vanity. What gives Tracy's situation a unique dimension is his long relationship with Katharine Hepburn, who was reportedly one of the few people with whom Tracy felt comfortable enough to remove his hairpiece. Hepburn's niece, Catherine Hout, later recalled, "My aunt told me that Tracy wore his hairpiece almost constantly in public and on set, but would remove it in private moments with her. She said he referred to it as this damn thing, but recognized it was essential to his continued viability as a leading man." Tracy's hairpieces became slightly more noticeable in his final film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967, which he completed shortly before his death. The film's director, Stanley Kramer, later revealed that Tracy's declining health during production affected many aspects of filming, including the maintenance of his appearance.
This has been a very strange day. I don't think that's putting it too strongly. I might even say it's been an extraordinary day.
10. Robert Taylor, MGM's manufactured leading man. Robert Taylor's journey from modest college student to MGM's premier leading man represents one of Hollywood's most successful image manufacturing operations, a transformation that included increasingly sophisticated hairpieces as his natural hairline receded throughout his career. Unlike some stars who began wearing hairpieces only after significant hair loss, Taylor's case was proactive. MGM began supplementing his hair before it had noticeably thinned, determined to protect their investment in creating the perfect romantic lead. By the early 1940s, when Taylor was still in his early 30s, the studio's hairstylists were already using small hairpieces to enhance his widow's peak and ensure the perfect hairline for close-ups. Hairstylist Sidney Gilleroff later revealed that the studio viewed Taylor's hair as a critical component of his marketability. Louis B. Mayer considered Robert's appearance a valuable studio asset, Gilleroff recalled. When Robert began showing early signs of thinning, Mayer personally approved the budget for creating the finest hairpieces available, considering it an essential investment in maintaining a valuable property. What makes Taylor's case interesting is how his hairpieces evolved alongside changing masculine ideals. In his early romantic roles opposite Greta Garbo and Vivian Leigh, his hairpieces created a perfectly styled appearance in keeping with 1930s notions of the romantic lead. As audience tastes shifted toward more rugged male images during and after World War II, Taylor's hairpieces were redesigned to create a more masculine, slightly less perfect appearance. Taylor's MGM contract included unusual provisions regarding his appearance maintenance. According to studio memos, Taylor was required to consult with the studio before making any changes to his appearance, including haircuts. A dedicated hairstylist was assigned to maintain consistency in his look across productions. Unlike some stars who were sensitive about their hairpieces, Taylor reportedly maintained a pragmatic attitude. Director George Sidney later recalled, "Bob approached his hairpiece the way he approached everything, with professionalism and without ego. He viewed it as part of his job, like knowing his lines or hitting his marks."
Horrible. It's worse than horrible because a zombie has no will of his own. You see them sometimes, walking around blindly with dead eyes, following orders, not knowing what they do, not caring. You mean like Democrats? Horrible. It's worse than horrible because a zombie has no will of his own. You see them sometimes, walking around blindly with dead eyes, following orders, not knowing what they do, not caring. You mean like Democrats?
11. Bob Hope, the comic who kept his topper under wraps. Bob Hope's 6-decade career as a comedian, actor, and USO entertainer made him one of America's most beloved figures. A national institution whose distinctive profile, ski-jump nose, and seemingly ageless appearance became instantly recognizable to generations of fans. What most of those fans never realized was that Hope's familiar appearance included a hairpiece from relatively early in his Hollywood career. Hope began wearing hairpieces in the early 1940s, when he was in his late 30s, and had already established himself as a radio star and rising film comedian. Unlike dramatic actors whose hairpieces were designed to maintain romantic appeal, Hope's situation presented unique requirements. His hairpiece needed to withstand the physical comedy and rapid movements that characterized his performances. What makes Hope's case particularly interesting is how his hairpiece occasionally became part of his comedic toolkit. In private performances for military troops, though never in his public broadcasts or films, Hope would occasionally incorporate incorporate his hairpiece into his routine, sometimes adjusting it deliberately to get laughs during moments when he pretended to be flustered or surprised. Makeup artist Wally Westmore later revealed Bob approached his hairpiece differently than most stars. While others treated theirs as a closely guarded secret, Bob saw his as occasionally useful for comedy, though only in certain settings and always on his terms. What distinguished Hope's hairpiece from many contemporaries was its remarkable consistency over decades. While other stars' hairpieces evolved in style and fullness, Hope maintained essentially the same appearance from the 1940s through the 1990s, a stability that became part of his brand. Hope's longtime personal hairstylist, Harry Gelbart, maintained a collection of identical hairpieces that were rotated and replaced as they showed wear. Bob's image was so established that any noticeable change would have been jarring to audiences, Gelbart explained. We created a system where his appearance remained consistent regardless of whether he was filming a movie, doing a television special, or entertaining troops overseas. As Hope aged into his 80s and 90s, his hairpiece became somewhat more noticeable, particularly during his later television specials. Yet even then, the viewing public largely accepted his unchanging appearance as simply part of the Bob Hope persona they had welcomed into their living rooms for generations.
How can we get the world to respect us if we don't respect ourselves?
12. Yul Brynner, the man who turned baldness into a trademark. Yul Brynner presents the most ironic case in our examination of Hollywood hairpieces. An actor who actually had hair but shaved his head for a role, only to discover that his bald appearance was so distinctive and powerful that it became his trademark. Yet even Brynner occasionally wore hairpieces when specific roles required him to appear with hair. Brynner's iconic bald look originated with his role as King Mongkut in the Broadway production of The King and I in 1951. Although he was experiencing some natural hair thinning, Brynner still had a reasonable amount of hair when he made the bold decision to completely shave his head for the role. The striking appearance, combined with his intense physicality and exotic features, created such a powerful impression that he maintained the shaved head when he reprised the role in the 1956 film version, winning an Academy Award for his performance. What makes Brynner's case fascinating is how this initially temporary character choice became a permanent personal trademark. After discovering the distinctive power of his bald appearance, Brynner continued to shave his head for the remainder of his career, recognizing that this unique look set him apart in an industry filled with conventionally coiffed leading men. The irony emerged when he occasionally needed to wear hairpieces for specific roles that required him to appear with hair. For films like Solomon and Sheba, 1959, and Taras Bulba, 1962, Brynner wore custom-made wigs, creating the unusual circumstance of a naturally balding man who deliberately made himself completely bald, having to artificially appear to have hair. Makeup artist Phil Rhodes later recalled, Yul approached wigs differently than other actors. While most stars wore hairpieces to conceal baldness and were sensitive about them, Yul saw wigs simply as costume elements. He had absolutely no ego attached to them because his real persona was the bald appearance he had chosen. By the time of his death in 1985, Brynner's bald head had become so iconic that most people assumed he had always been naturally bald, the ultimate testament to how successfully he had transformed a deliberate choice into a seemingly innate characteristic.
The stupid thing is to see somebody who's got a wisp of hair that's 8 feet long that he's coiled around and he's kind of nailed it to the back of his head and looks like, a snake that's about to...
13. Sean Connery. From Bond's perfect hair to embracing baldness. Sean Connery's relationship with hairpieces presents one of Hollywood's most interesting evolutions. A star who wore hairpieces for his definitive early roles, but later made the unusual decision to embrace his natural baldness, ultimately creating two distinct phases of his iconic career. Connery began losing his hair remarkably early, already showing significant baldness by his mid-20s, long before he became famous. When he was cast as James Bond in Dr. No, 1962, producers immediately recognized that the suave secret agent required a full head of hair. Throughout all his Bond films, Connery wore increasingly elaborate hairpieces that became an integral part of 07's debonair image. Makeup artist Charles Parker later revealed, Sean's Bond hairpieces were constructed with special reinforced bases and secured with extra strong adhesive to withstand fights, underwater scenes, and romantic encounters. The hairpiece was considered as essential to the Bond image as the Walther PPK or the Aston Martin. Connery continued wearing hairpieces throughout the 1960s and into the 1970s. However, as he entered his 40s, Connery Connery made a decision almost unprecedented for a leading man of his stature. He stopped wearing hairpieces for most roles, allowing his significant natural baldness to be visible on screen. This transition is most evident in comparing his appearance in Diamonds Are Forever, 1971, where he still wears a full hairpiece as Bond, with The Offense, 1973, where he appears with his natural baldness clearly visible. This deliberate choice coincided with Connery's desire to escape typecasting as Bond and establish himself as a serious dramatic actor. Director Sidney Lumet later recalled Connery's reasoning. Sean told me he was tired of the discomfort and artifice of hairpieces. He said, "I'm not Bond anymore. I don't need to maintain that perfect image. Let's show the real me." It was a brave decision few stars of his stature would have made. What makes Connery's choice particularly remarkable is that it didn't diminish his leading man status or sex appeal. In fact, his natural appearance in films like The Hunt for Red October and The Untouchables established a new paradigm for mature masculine appeal, proving that baldness could be compatible with continuing sex symbol status when paired with confidence and screen presence.
I did a lot, yes, a great deal. I at one time thought of changing my name, and then there was so much publicity about the idea I was going to change my name, defeated this whole idea, defeated the purpose.
14. Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Hollywood royalty's hidden crown. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. inherited more than just a famous name from his father. He also inherited a tendency toward early hair loss, creating a challenging situation for a man whose career was built partly on swashbuckling roles that required the same vibrant physical appeal his father had embodied. Fairbanks Jr. began experiencing noticeable hair loss in his early 30s, around the time of his naval service during World War II. When he returned to Hollywood after the war, the contrast between his pre-war appearance and his thinning hair presented a potential career obstacle for an actor known for romantic and action roles. What makes Fairbanks Jr.'s case particularly interesting is how his approach to hairpieces reflected his aristocratic persona both on and off screen. Unlike some stars who tried to conceal the fact they wore hairpieces, Fairbanks Jr. approached the situation with sophisticated pragmatism, viewing his hairpieces as simply another element of maintaining the proper appearance expected of someone in his position. Hairstylist Robert Schiffer later recalled, "Douglas approached his hairpieces the way an English gentleman approaches his wardrobe. They should be of the finest quality, perfectly maintained, but never discussed in public. He expected excellence, but had no vanity about the fact he needed them." This attitude aligned with Fairbanks Jr.'s overall public persona as a cultured, worldly figure who moved comfortably between Hollywood, international diplomacy, and British high society. His hairpieces were crafted to maintain the appropriate appearance for these various spheres, emphasizing quality and subtlety rather than creating an illusion of youthfulness. What distinguished Fairbanks Jr.'s hairpieces was their gradual evolution as he aged. Unlike some stars who maintained implausibly youthful hair into their senior years, Fairbanks Jr. allowed his artificial hair to gray naturally and become slightly less full over time, changes that matched his natural aging process and maintained the credibility of his appearance.
Why, you sniveling sardine! Are you pompous, puffed up penguin? Our friends make peace. Have a shake on me. A joke a day keeps the gloom away.
15. Cesar Romero, the Latin lover's covered crown. Cesar Romero's 6-decade career in Hollywood spanned from Latin lover roles in the 1930s to his iconic portrayal of the Joker in the Batman television series of the 1960s. Throughout this remarkable longevity, Romero maintained the debonair, sophisticated image that made him a reliable presence in everything from romantic comedies to westerns to superhero camp, with the help of increasingly obvious hairpieces. Romero began losing his hair in his 30s, creating a potential career obstacle for an actor whose appeal was built largely on his smooth, continental charm and good looks. Unlike some stars who began wearing hairpieces at the first sign of thinning, Romero initially allowed his receding hairline to be visible in films of the late 1930s and early 1940s. As his hair loss progressed, however, he transitioned to wearing hairpieces that became a permanent part of his screen image. What makes Romero's case particularly interesting is how his hairpieces became more rather than less noticeable as his career progressed. In his early films, his hairpieces were relatively natural-looking. By the time he appeared as the Joker in Batman in the mid-1960s, however, his hairpiece had become quite obvious, creating a slightly artificial appearance that actually complemented the campy tone of the series. Makeup artist Ben Nye later recalled, "Cesar had a unique attitude about his hairpiece. Unlike most stars who wanted their hairpieces to be undetectable, he wasn't particularly concerned if people noticed. He used to say, "I'm playing a part either way. What difference does it make if the hair is part of the performance too?" This relatively relaxed attitude extended to how Romero handled his hairpiece on set. While many stars required privacy when their hairpieces were being applied or adjusted, Romero was known to casually adjust his if it became dislodged during action scenes, or to remove it entirely during breaks if the weather was hot. By his later career in the 1970s and 1980s, Romero's hairpiece had become almost a character in itself, particularly in television appearances where the lighting and closer camera work made it more noticeable. Yet audiences accepted this slight artificiality as simply part of his overall persona, an extension of the slightly theatrical quality he brought to many of his roles. These 15 legendary performers reveal fascinating patterns in how Hollywood's most carefully guarded cosmetic secret-shaped careers and screen personas. From Humphrey Bogart's tough guy image to Fred Astaire's dancing elegance, from John Wayne's frontier ruggedness to Cary Grant's sophisticated perfection, each star's hairpiece became an integral part of their iconic screen presence. What emerges most clearly is how the evolution of hairpiece technology paralleled Hollywood's growing technical sophistication in other areas. The crude, obvious wigs of early cinema gave way to increasingly natural-looking creations that could withstand the scrutiny of Technicolor close-ups and location shooting. Perhaps most revealing is how each star's relationship with their hairpiece reflected broader aspects of their persona and approach to stardom. The perfectionists like Cary Grant demanded flawless, undetectable hairpieces that enhanced their immaculate image. The more natural performers like James Stewart insisted on hairpieces that looked slightly imperfect and ordinary. The pragmatists like John Wayne viewed hairpieces as simply another tool of their trade. These variations reveal that even in something as seemingly straightforward as covering baldness, Hollywood's star system created individualized approaches that reinforced each performer's unique appeal and market positioning. The legacy of these hairpiece-wearing stars offers important insights into Hollywood's complex relationship with physical appearance and authenticity. In an industry built on illusion, the hairpiece represented perhaps the most common and accepted form of physical enhancement, a tacit acknowledgement that certain concessions to artifice were necessary to maintain the Dream Factory's output of glamour and excitement. What's particularly striking is how successfully this secret was maintained throughout the Golden Age. In an era before internet scrutiny and high-definition television, audiences largely accepted their screen idols' appearances without question. The careful lighting, strategic camera angles, and meticulous hairpiece maintenance created a convincing illusion that allowed viewers to focus on performances rather than physical imperfections. This collective agreement to maintain the illusion extended beyond studios and stars to the entertainment press, which rarely, if ever, mentioned hairpieces in profiles or interviews. This code of silence preserved the carefully constructed images that audiences had emotionally invested in, a vastly different approach than today's celebration of revealing the truth behind celebrity appearances. Perhaps the most valuable insight from these Golden Age stars' hairpiece stories is recognizing how this small deception served a larger truth, creating memorable characters and personas that continue to resonate decades after these films were made. The hairpieces that helped Bogart embody Rick in Casablanca or John Wayne personify Western masculinity were ultimately minor details in the creation of characters and performances that have achieved cultural immortality. As Fred Astaire once reportedly told a young actor, "They don't remember whether you had hair, they remember whether you could dance." And there you have it, 15 iconic Hollywood legends whose famous hairstyles were actually carefully crafted illusions. From Humphrey Bogart's slicked-back sophistication to John Wayne's frontier mane, from Cary Grant's perfect coif to James Stewart's everyman locks, these stars maintained their screen images with the help of Hollywood's unsung heroes, the wig makers and hairstylists who kept their secrets. What makes these stories so fascinating isn't just the revelation that these stars wore hairpieces, but how each hairpiece was specifically designed to enhance the unique screen persona that made them legends. The perfect hair was never just about vanity. It was an essential component of the characters and images that made these actors into cultural icons. Which of these stars surprised you the most? Had you ever noticed hints of these hidden hairpieces in your favorite classic films? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear which revelations most changed how you see these legendary performers. If you enjoyed this deeper look at Hollywood's best-kept secret, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more videos revealing the hidden history of classic cinema. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.